Hi, I'm Donna Shear, Director of University of Nebraska Press, and James gave me the honor of introducing Viktor Stoilov, who is going to join James in a conversation. First, I want to apologize if I mispronounce any of the Czech names I'm about to say. Second, I want to thank James for putting together this phenomenal week, this program, to mark a truly momentous historical event. I also want to thank him for inviting me to dinner tomorrow night to a black tie event. I have pulled 3 black dresses from the back of my closet, and I hope and pray that one of them fits. You'll find out tomorrow night. It's my pleasure to introduce fellow publisher Viktor Stoilov, who's going to engage with James in conversation. Viktor graduated from Charles University in Prague with a major in ethnography and folklore. And I was thinking to myself this morning, those bygone days when you could just major in the humanities and get as narrow as you wanted. But in 1988 and through to 1989, he began photographing a series of portraits of banned writers. After the Velvet Revolution, he presented these portraits at several exhibitions, and then he published them, the first book to come from his new publishing house, Tourist. Since then, Tourist has published over 600 books, including the writings of Václav Havel, Ivan Martin Jiruš, the photographic books of Josef Koudelka, and of course Josef Sudek. Many, many others as well, and James said probably the most important publishing house in the Czech Republic. And I'm assuming with the rich history and beauty of the Czech Republic, there's no end to that, the potential of the publishing house. In my own publishing career, I've been honored to publish some of the greatest Czech writers in English, particularly when I was at Northwestern University Press in our European Classics series. For those of you who remember Closely Watched Trains by Havel, that was first published in English at Northwestern. And I really admire the rich traditions of Czech literature. And with that, I'll say no more, and I'll give the mic over to Viktor and James.
It's an honor to be on the stage with Viktor today. This is the second time I've had an opportunity to interview Viktor. The last time was in Prague. Today we're going to focus on a couple things. I'd like to have him walk through his career as a publisher, and then we'll talk about some specific things that he published. I'd like to start with the word Torst. Can you just give us a little background on how you developed that name and where it came from, how you created it?
Good morning. I just want to apologize for my English, but James said that no good English is better than translations. So Torst is a small private publishing house, and the name Torst is from my first name. The last 2 letters and the beginning last 3 letters. No, Torst, Viktor, and the first 2 letters from the second name. Paul didn't know it. So you want to say how I start to publish?
Yeah, let's start there.
Okay, I have to go back to the 80s. As you told, at that time I was kind of photographer because I like reading, and I am happy that I have a good connection to people. They have a samizdat at home, so I was a big fan of reading, and I read a lot. And in the samizdat, you know, that's the books which are typing on the typewriter, and there are no pictures inside, any photos. So I was thinking that maybe I met these authors in Prague, but I don't know how they look like because I don't know his face, his. So I have the idea that I will visited them and making portraits of them. I have one connection to Ludvík Vaculík. I don't know anybody before that, and call him, and he invite me to his house, and I started like photographing band authors. After revolution, I have an exhibition from this portrait, and I was looking for the publisher, and I make it shortly. I publish it myself. It was like beginning of 90s, and everybody start with something new. So I think that that will be a good idea. But I don't know what will be next. It will be just my book of photography, like self-publisher.
You are important for being among the most important publishers in the Czech Republic, but you're also important because you're part of a history of publishing in the Czech Republic. Can you walk me through a little bit about the publishing world during the First Republic, during the German Protectorate, after 1948 through after 68, a little bit about the history of publishing in Czechoslovakia and the Czech Republic?
Okay, so very roughly, from the beginning of Czechoslovakia, 1918 till 1989, we have, from this period, we have 1/4 of this time in which we could publish books without censorship. It was from the beginning, from 1918 to 1938, it was like normal times, and at that time, for me, I have influence of a small publishing houses which was established at the time. For example, Josef Florian and his publishing house Opus Bonum. So these books was published in number of copies like 500, and even in the 60s or 70s or 80s, these books has influence to the readers all the time. So in the 38 starts German occupation till the end of the Second War, 45. So during this time exists censorship and wasn't possible to publish everything. After the Second War, from the 45 till the February 48, there is a 2.5 year of freedom publishing, but it stops very, very roughly when communists came and banned all the private businesses, especially publishing houses. It lasts till the 89. In the mid of 60s, during the Prague Spring, it was a little bit better situation to publish translation and also Czech novels, but for example, we are publishing diaries of Jan Zebrana, Czech well-known translator, and you can read in these diaries how awful is the time for him. The books was quite okay, or very good books was published, but he must go through even in the Prague Spring, censorship exists, and so it was better, but still communist regime. So it will, from the end of 60s, my influences is by this publishing house, Odeon, and of course in the 70s and 80s it wasn't possible to publish freely, and most of books were published in samizdat. So samizdat also influenced me, and the publishing houses which exist abroad, like in the Canada, in Toronto, Josef Škvorecký established 68 publishers.
I have a couple questions about the books of photography, but I'd like to just ask a question about what you just said. The shift from samizdat publishing to open publishing Can you tell me a little bit about what that was like, moving from a world where the press was underground to a world where the press was in public? Did you try to recruit some of the same authors who were publishing underground? How did you think about this transition?
Yeah, of course, that the samizdat publishing houses continue. For example, Revolver Revy exists as a samizdat, and after revolution they became normal publishing houses, and they had, or each publishing house has his own crew of authors. And I was lucky because I know these people as a photographer, so I visited them, these authors, and I know what the manuscript they have at home. But in the 1990, I published only one book, and I don't think at the time that it will be normal publishing houses, publishing house tourist. So, but after 1 year of after revolution of free publishing houses, the big state publishing houses has financial problems because they don't manage the transformation. And the books which I like most, like diaries, memoirs, books about photography, these big publishing houses may go these books away because of budget. So I start this publishing house, my publishing house, to be I cut all the costs. So at the beginning, first 10 years, I don't have any office. I do myself my desktop publishing, and till now we don't have any employees.
You do have an office now. I've been in your office.
Yeah, I have because I have 3 small kids, so I need the office.
Can you talk a little bit about Sudek, how you became involved in publishing Sudek's work, his photography, and other photographers?
Okay, maybe I will start with Koudelka because the slideshow is starts from Koudelka.
Okay.
I met him in the '88 in Magnum agency in Paris, and as other authors, I knew him personally before, and I don't know that I will be publisher at the time, but I can say that we was friends. Koudelka is well known for his gypsy series, mostly from Slovakia, Moravia, and also Czech Republic. This book I also published. That's very famous. I think most of you knows these pictures. Mm-hmm. But we are here because of spring '68. It ended by the invasion of Russians in August 21st. Mm-hmm. And we published these books we published 10 years ago, and I think that it's not usual for a Czech publisher that we prepared the book in Czech language, Invasion '68, and then we sold the rights to 12 foreign publishing houses, included Thames and Hudson in Britain or Aperture in the United States. So that's the box. In the middle, all the variation of languages. Koudelka, of course, want to publish the books in the Russia language, but I told him that if he don't find a Russian publisher, I will publish it in Russia myself. So it happens because nobody in Russia was interested in it. So on the right side you will see the cover of the Russian language, published by myself, only these books.
Interesting.
So here are the famous photos near the Prague radio on Vinohradská street. So he's photographing during only 7 or 8 days, and like it's more than 20 films a day he did. So there was 1,000 of photos, and we have to choose. But this what you see, that's the pick, the best one. Mm-hmm. But in the book there is more than 250 photos. If I show to the children, they cannot imagine that it will happen in Prague. Mm-hmm. It's hard to imagine. Mm-hmm. Even for me, I was in the first class at school at the time.
Do you remember it?
We live in the suburb of Prague, so I remember just my mother said that there will be war and came to the shop and there was nothing inside.
Did you have a camera then?
Pardon?
Did you have a camera then?
In the first class? Mm-hmm. No. So, and what's happened next with the Russian book, that it's like a miracle that together with the Czech embassy at Czech center in Moscow, we did the exhibition of the 68 photos in Moscow. So it's like an invasion back. Mm-hmm. And on the left side in the middle is Natalia Gorbanevská, is one of 7 persons who demonstrate against the Russian invasion in Prague. So Koudelka was met with her for the first time, and they said that they was heroes, these 7 people. Mm-hmm. That's another photographer, Bohdan Holomíček, and I published him a book, Album Václav. It's about Václav Havel. He is close related with Havel, but he knows him from the 74. He knows him as a neighbor because he lived near the Havels summer house. So this is his first visit in the 74. That's with Olga Havlova sitting on the porch. Czech Czech actor Jan Tříska. He was emigrated to Los Angeles in the end of 70s. And of course Holomíček was used his camera as a diary. Mm-hmm. So mm-hmm. It's not the same photos like Koudelka. Mm-hmm. It's the photos of his relationship with these people. Mm-hmm. All these Pavel Kohout and Alexander Kliment, all these was Czech authors which signed Charta 77 and at the time was banned. That's very rare photo, Václav Havel with his brother Ivan Havel and father. I think that only one this photo altogether. And this is Havel's 50th birthday party. It means that it's year 1986. It's 3 years till the revolution, and it's important to see that on this photo are two playwrights which are banned and two playwrights which are normally played in the Czech theater in this time. Mm-hmm. So it was beginning of something unusual. Madeleine Albright, it's after revolution, Madeleine Albright visited Havel's house in 1994 with Sasha Vondra. He was at the time ambassador in New York, Czech ambassador in New York. And that's Holomíček with Havel together. And third author which I pick is Josef Sudek, because he's related with Lincoln. You have a nice exhibition upstairs, and for me it's important author also, and I am preparing, I published him like 10 books altogether. The first monography in 1995, and then this series of his books. It published in Czech and English. You have it also here. Portraits, advertising, St. Vitus, Mionchi Forest. So I will pick just few pictures. You can see the better one, original upstairs. The St. Vitus Cathedral. These photos are made because of 10th anniversary of Czech Republic in the 1928. And the St. Vitus was in reconstruction. This is still lifes. Advertising photography. Now it looks like art, but at the time it was normal advertising photography. And the window of my studio. So Sudek lived and photographing during like all the communist and Nazist regime, and you can see anything like with Koudelka or Holomíček, but of course if you look carefully, this series of window of my studio he made from the 40s till 50s, the war's time, and he took these photographs 15 years or more than 15 years, and he focused only on one window or two windows of his studio.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that he did that because he didn't want to photograph outside, like in the streets as much, or what do you think he was doing with those window photographs?
Yeah, I think that he don't want to go out from his studio to communicate and to cooperate with publishing houses at the time.
Mm-hmm. So his move inside to the interior of his house,
yes.
Because these are very famous photographs, right? It was his
artistic to his head,
artistic
and
response to
in his mind
the
and
German occupation.
It's like first conceptual art ever in the 40s. Yeah. That's him. That's the book of his interviews from the newspapers and magazines.
Yeah, the audience may not know the whole story, but he became a photographer after the First World War. He was wounded, lost an arm, and he began to do photography from the First Republic, photographed all the way through to the early 70s when he died. And the University of Nebraska has an exhibition upstairs because we own some of the really famous Sudek photographs. Can you talk a little bit about the photographs you might have seen before we talk about publishing Have you had a chance to see the photographs upstairs?
Yeah.
What do you think of them?
Yeah, I think that it's a nice small selection, but this selection is made by him because he was clever and he sent the photos not only to Lincoln and to other friends, or for example Sonia Bulati. She was from New York and she knows him from Prague, and she exchanged his photo. He was not selling them at the time. He exchanged his photo for gramophone records because he is a big fan of listening of music, and Kodak photo papers, which he need, and it wasn't possible to find it in Czech Republic at the time. So it was like exchange market.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing that's come up in some of the discussions I've had with people. You have Samistat press and the underground press, but you also had film and photography paper, chemicals, et cetera, were difficult to have,
Yeah,
especially
you
during
can
the
have
communist era.
Czech photographic paper, but the quality wasn't so good as a Kodak.
Okay. How do you think the three photographers you've chosen to show today speak to us about the history of Czechoslovakia and the Czech Republic? What do you think they say in those photographs? 3 different illustrations, 3 different ways of seeing the world. How do you think that what do they say to you? And then what might you ask us to take from those photographs?
No, as I said, I picked these 3 because for me they are the best from the 20th century, and his topics are related in the 20th century, like invasion. That's the Václav Havel, and the Sudek is an icon.
About Havel, I wanted to ask you a few questions. We'll come back to some more photography, but I want to ask you about your relationship with Václav Havel. Can you tell me how you met Václav Havel, how you began to, because you publish, as you showed, he published the entire collected works of Václav Havel in, I think, in those books.
These books.
Those books.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about how those books came about, and how you created them, and then what was Havel's role in the publishing of those books?
It became everything started for me in the 80s. I visited some concert or theater shows, which was from time to time good ones in Prague, and of course all Culture Prague was there, even Václav Havel was there, but I don't know him personally. So but I was reading his text at the time, so I was young and excited about all these things, so I tried to speak to him, but there was a crowd of people every time, and I was shy. So I wrote him a letter, like 3 pages of what I have in my mind, and in a few days I got invitation to his apartment to visit him. It was. Today it's like sounds strange, but it was normal. So it was in 1986, I think, 86. So I knew him from the time, and I'm grateful to him because it was good that he puts people together. So he introduced me to other people, and it works. These people was my friends, and some of them I published till today. But after revolution, Havel works was published very quickly because it was necessary in several publishing houses, but when it is so quickly, there was a it wasn't prepared properly. So in the 1995, he asked me, because we published collected or selected volumes of Czech authors in this time. So he knew that we are able to do it. So he asked me to prepare him collected volumes of his work. So it took 2.5 years. And of course, I am not preparing it. I am a publisher, so each volume has each editor, and it was more than 8,000 pages. It's a lot of work.
I want to go back to that how you met Havel. You wrote him a letter. Can you talk about that letter that you wrote to Havel? Because it must have been a good letter, because he replied in 3 days. And he was a very busy person at that point. So talk a little bit about maybe what that letter was like. What did he find attractive about your letter? I know a little bit about this because I talked to Viktor about this before.
I will show you the letter, but no, I don't remember what's that.
Yeah. But it was a good letter, right?
Yeah.
And he liked it, and that was so. If you were a young person. This made a big impression on you, right?
I don't know.
I remember you talking about it before. That's fine. Okay, well, I'll let you think about that for a second. But the publishing of these books took you 2.5 years, you said? And
yeah, so some of the text wasn't published never, like his poems. That's the first volume, and he was shy to publish these poems, and we must ask his friend Josef Topol to approve it, and so. But Josef Topol know these poems. He said just to the phone, tell him that the poems are okay, and and that's all. So there are essays from the 50s and 60s. This part of his work was published at the time in any books, so it was hard to find it, and Havel was sometimes surprised what he wrote, and sometimes said that only once. He said, don't publish this because I have to, it was easier for me to write this text than regret the people who asked me to write it. So it's a text about one photographer, and he pushed to Havel offensively, so he wrote a short text about him, and but Havel don't want to publish it in the book.
Can I ask you a couple questions?
The speeches, there are the last two volumes are presidential speeches, but of course he wants to have inside only the speeches which he wrote himself, and not only speak by mind, but which is written speeches.
Mm-hmm. Could you maybe pick out a couple things, your favorite Havel pieces that you published, since you've published the collected works of Havel? You have a couple of things that you really like in his work? Well, you probably like all of it, but is there something really that jumps out at you as the...
For me, it was very interesting to see his poetry as a, jak to bylo, diagrams, jak je to, takové to visual poetry. So it was published in the 60s, at the end of the 60s, and this I like.
Why do you like his...
I picked this one because I don't want to talk about his famous essays and so on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you found the poetry surprising?
He had better people to speak about it.
But you found the poetry surprising, maybe?
I like it.
Okay, okay, all right. What is it about publishing that you like the most?
Somebody asked me about if I published the books more than 25 years. It's more than quarter of century, so I never imagined that it will last so long. And somebody asked me about burning out, but I think that I have no time to burn out because it's like a adrenaline sport. I published a book and I never knows what happens. It's hard to.
How have you seen
For example, Petra Hulova, he's sitting here. my author, I published her in her age of 22 years, and nobody knows her at the time. She studied Mongolian language, and his first novel, I like it, and I think I will publish it in 800 copies or 1,000 copies. So until today, it's Thor's bestseller book ever. It's more than 25,000 pieces sold books. So that's good adrenaline. But sometimes it's opposite.
Yeah.
I think that it will be.
It must be fun to discover people like Petra Hulova, right?
Yeah,
Right.
it was fun. No, I like it.
What other authors, writers come to mind that you're looking for? Is there? Do you see shifts in publishing? As after 1989, there was a lot of euphoria after the revolution, after '89 and after the Velvet Revolution. Do you see shifts in the history of publishing now? Are there trends that you're looking at as a publisher? What's on the horizon?
My horizon? No.
Publishing's horizon, if you will.
No, every decade has its own problems.
Mm-hmm.
So in the 90s, it was a distribution. Now I think it's a number of copies which is available, number of not copies but number of published books. It's in this year in Czech Republic was published 17,000 books per year. So it's a small market, and sometimes I was wondering how it works that for readers it's okay, you can go to the bookshop and choose what you like, but I think there are a lot of good books and less time to focus on them and read them and talk about the topics.
I would imagine that after '89, a lot of the interest was in focused on political issues. In other words, there was tremendous issue in politics. Have you seen that?
There are big gap that we not only my publishing house but all publishers have to fill, because as I told about the censorship, in the like for example in the beginning of 90s, some authors have, I don't know, 10 or 15 manuscripts which doesn't published. So they want to be published quickly, but if you published a lot of books by one author, I don't know what's good.
That's interesting, because it must have been difficult to choose which of the 10 books that were not published before, and which ones to publish first. Did you have any criteria you looked for in publishing those books?
Yeah, I speak here by myself, but I have Jan Schulz. I have to talk about him, that he's my editor, and if we are doing the editorial plans, we are doing it together. But we have our view what we want to do or not. But it's very hard to explain it.
And how long has he been your editor? The whole time, or?
The whole time,
Whole
yes,
time.
from the beginning. I knew him from the Faculty of Philosophy from the 80s.
And is he the same age as you?
But-
Is he your age, the same age, or?
Yes, just a few years younger, like 2 or 3 years younger.
Okay. So a couple more questions about this, and I think I'd like to open it up to the audience to ask questions. We can use the time to let you, I'm sure the audience has a lot of questions you'd like to ask. Well, you know what, I will let the audience ask the next couple questions. I've got a list of questions, but I've already gone through most of them. Do you have any more photographs you'd like to show?
No. That's the first time when Václav Havel was looking at the book in the 1999. I have the date here, 1st of December.
Mm-hmm.
And I choose one wine photograph. If it's from the May of 1988 or 89.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm not sure. It's homecoming party when Václav Havel came from prison,
Mm-hmm.
and that's the first meeting with Alexander Dubček, first secretary of Communist Party in the '68. But they was never met before.
Mm-hmm. I do have one question before we're going to hand over the mic. What was it like to have an intellectual or an author as a president?
Yeah, it's not only a question about him. It's a question of most of my authors. So I wrote them before, and I never think that I ever meet them. But later on, I will publish them. So I think that's sometimes I can imagine that it's true, because they will ask me how to do it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So if they ask, I have to answer something, and it works.
It does. Okay, I'm going to hand over the mic to you, and Martin. By the way, thank you for the amazing concert last night.
Thank you. Until recently, I was a chairman of the board of the big Bonton conglomerate, which had few radio stations and publishing houses, and mostly music production and studios, etc. And among those publishing houses, Albatross was the biggest one, the major one, the biggest one for the children literature. And there was a board meeting, every other week, and so we looked at the editorial plan, and 75%, 90% we just had to skip, because there was no way how to make profit, or how to at least break even, And Viktor was very often quoted, because everybody said, "How come that Torst can do it, and we cannot, release poetry or nice books?" So it was amazing. I mean, I think Viktor must be a saint, or he must have a very rich banker somewhere in this country, or maybe Israel or somewhere, where he would sponsor his books, because we just made it. It's just impossible. If you look at the numbers, you got to. You sometimes you weep that great books cannot go out, but this is what decision you've got to make unless you want to go under. Then later it was better we released Harry Potter, which will bring some substantial money, so with which you can then do things like I don't know, close to Viktor, because I like poetry and photography and beautiful books. It was really hard to do. So this is the first question: how do you do it? And the second is more personal. When I was in the editorial commission myself at Supraphon Records, which was the major music publisher in our country, and I had to express my tastes to what we should release, it was always disaster, absolute disaster. So then if you are a chairman of the board, you cannot really blame the people. Sooner or later, I've seen the conflict of interest, very big, and I got to withdraw because I forced them to release something to my taste, and then that it was a flop, So that was a terrible disaster. So I've got to leave this function and not to talk into what's going out in Supraphon, which some of my friends reproached. They said, "Well, this is the guy who said you do a great jazz music, and now he's releasing, like blast music from Southern Bohemia or things like this." So this is the second question: how do you manage that you release the things you personally like, and you are still living and doing so well?
I don't know if I understand the question properly. How do I like?
How are you able to release books that you like as a publisher? Because he was expressing sometimes publishers follow their instincts and it doesn't work in publishing. How are you successful at releasing some of the books that you like? And how do you do it? The other question was...
I think I told about you that I like it. I like the book, and I have to do it everything to be on the market, to be to have a choice that the reader will read it. How do you mean it financially? Financial. First of all is this, and the second is I have no employees. First 10 years I have no office. First, like 10 or 15 years, I do my desktop publishing. So I cut the budget to the roots. So that's the basic.
And what is it about the threshold of, let's say, Zebrano's diaries? How many copies?
So it's a similar with Petra Hulova. Sometimes I did something because I love it, like Zebrana. It was in 1994. It was a big success, but it was huge diaries, like more than 1,000 pages, and nobody wants to publish it. Like widow of Jan Zebrana gave it to the 2 publishing houses, and they don't want it.
And how many copies do you have to sell to break even?
This question is very often, but there is not only one answer. If it's books about photography, it's different. If it's poetry, and it's different. What's the fee for the author? Sometimes it's, for example, in the poetry, it's very hard to pay the fee for the author. So sometimes it's 500 copies, and sometimes it's 1,500. But of course, that we have to find support, especially for the books about photography, which is difficult to prepare all the scans and retouching and pre-press.
I'm really enjoying this conversation, and I just had a question. I wonder if you could give a little bit more context, and I hope I understood the photograph correctly when you pointed out from, I think, 1986 two sort of official published playwrights and two Samizdat published playwrights. Did I understand that correctly? With Havel in the photograph with the four playwrights together.
I want to apologize not only for my English, but also for my bad hearing, especially.
Oh,
with
okay.
this.
I'm sorry.
No, I hear. All, if you get
Yeah.
closely, because I don't hear.
I'll be super clear and uncomplicated.
I didn't understand it either, so.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I wonder if you could give a little context for the mid-1980s about the relationship in Czechoslovakia between official culture and unofficial culture. The idea that for an East Germany, for example, at the time, or Poland, there would be official artists who were officially published with state-sponsored publishers and presses with a Samizdat author, these would be adversaries and there would be no common ground for them to talk to each other. But I wondered if you, from your perspective as a Samizdat publisher, could talk about the relationship between the unofficial artists and official culture. Does that make sense?
So the relationship between the official communist-sponsored authors,
In the 80s.
In the 80s, especially because in theater, because it was public.
No. One good example is the famous Czech writer Bohumil Hrabal, because he published in the 80s in all three channels or kind of publishing house, in the state publishing house, in the Samizdat, and of course in the exile publishing houses like Škvorecký publisher 68. Even especially at the end of the 80s, it was much teď nevím, jak říct, už jsem se do toho zamotal, ale I don't know even in Czech.
I can't. No one can help you. Okay, I do have a question. Okay, I think it's Patti Simpson. So Patti Simpson's question is it's interesting because you have in the mid '80s you have this competition between official and unofficial, right? The repressed authors who are going to become official, in fact, president, right? And then you have these other authors that were sponsored by the regime, right? And there's a competition in the publishing world over who's going to win this, right? But what Patty's question was, they're both together. So the way that we usually review these authors is they're completely separate, but they're still friends. That's what's interesting, I think, about Patty's question, right? They're still friends, and even though they might be officially condoned or applauded, or censored, banned, etc., they're still friends, and they realize that they're still operating in a system together, and maybe they used each other. I think that's probably what you're kind of suggesting, right? In an interesting way, right? I think Paul Wilson has another question.
If I can just comment on that question. I mean, I know a little bit about the the way Havel, especially in the 1980s, maintained very strong relations with people who were able to publish and able to have their plays. He kept his relationships open with people who were functioning officially. And that was part of his, there were a lot of people who disagreed with him about that. They thought they should, if you're official, you're bad. I mean, there was the group of people that I knew in Prague actually burned, I mean, Ivan Euros, and my next question will be about him, actually burned Havel's books on Kampa in the 1970s. It was a terrible thing that he did, but to express his disapproval. Havel never went that way. He kept his relationships with his theater friends and his actor friends open, and that was part of his ability was to sort of bring people together. But I have a question. I have a couple of questions. Where there was a moment in December of 1989 when a huge bus arrived from the West, full of Czech books published abroad. That had to be smuggled in at one point and were now brought in. There was a bookstore near Ipe Pavlova Náměstí that kind of sold these books or helped to distribute them somehow under the counter. I'm not sure. Are you aware of this bookstore? This special? No, you weren't. Yes, so you weren't there. I'm not sure. I helped unload these books because I happened to be there.
It was famous Czech bookshop called Čapek bookshop.
That's right. Yes. Okay.
But
so how was he able to? I mean, he was famous for. I mean, was he able to sell Samizdat books sort of under the counter, or what was his relationship with the unofficial writers?
Because it wasn't at the time possible to be a private bookshop, but the chief of this bookshop was Seidel. After revolution, he had his own bookshop, but he was good. So he, for example, when John Updike came to Prague, so he has book signing there. And there was a jazzová sekce, and it wasn't samizdat, it was a little bit officially, but they published also good books, and the chief of jazzová sekce went to prison also in the 80s, but they invite not Lotov, but Philip Roth will come to Prague, and they will go to this bookshop. So I think that they run this bookshop perfectly.
So this was possible in the 1980s, that it was.
And because of that, they have contacts, and it's like a snowball.
I wanted to ask you another question about one of your recent publications was a book called Magor, which I think has been very successful, and I wonder if you could talk a little bit about this other, I think, a very important person in Czech culture of the 70s and 80s, Ivan Euros, and this book apparently, from what you told me yesterday, has become kind of like a bestseller almost.
It's a new book. They got the prize just on Tuesday, Magnesia Litera. I published this book last year. It's a biography of Ivan Martin Euros, called Major, the leader, a person of Czech underground movement. It's the same as I told before, that I published it. I think that biography has a strong potential to be not only commercial potential, but to be read. I published 3,000 copies, and I sold it till the Christmas, and till today it's 9,000 copies sold. But what's the funny that Švehla, who wrote this, Marek Švehla, who wrote this book, wrote an article to Respect magazine like 6 years ago, when at the time was Magor celebrate, I don't know, 60 years or something like that. And I called Švehla and asked him that I like this article, and I asked him to write the biography. And at the beginning he said no, and a year after he said yes, maybe I'll try it. And after 5 years, I got the first chapter of manuscript, but I forgot it. So I told him that's good idea to write Magor's biography, and he said that was your idea. So, so.
All right. So I would have sort of a follow-up question. And, it's sort of known that now CIA is leaking that when they were leading their sort of warfare, to tip the scales over before the Iron Curtain fell down, they did it through the books. And they said the biggest advantage was that all of Central and Eastern Europe were huge readers. Yeah. And we all remember that even so the Czech authors were heavily censored, I think there were pretty good publishing houses which were able to, have large volume translation books, especially American authors, which were actually widely spread, and they, it was published in so very many copies. So saying this is, we had a nation which was, heavily reading whatever they could have their hands on, and then, 1989 came, and you've been, through all the sort of transition times. And my question is following. So now we have a different market. We still have a very solid base of readers. Torst became brand. You have, different publishing strategies. But do you have to cater to the sort of diversified, cultural sort of landscape? And changing readership. And what do you think is now the sort of key to your success? Obviously, I have a group which sort of follows your brand, but on the other hand, there are so very many tiny publishers which come and go. So do you sometimes feel pressed by the sort of general moods or sort of readers' expectations, if that makes sense?
I'm not sure if I hear the question properly, but there are, I think that's a Czech speciality, that there are a lot of small private publishing houses. It's not usual, we can say, in the West. And everybody starts at the beginning of 90s, so we are thinking what will happen in the few years with us, because I think that Torst will quit with me as I quitted, because it's not possible to run it as a normal business, because most of the relationship with the author is very, very private. It's like a big family. Sometimes I don't have agreement, or the agreement is only by phone or in the pub or somewhere. So there are big publishing houses, and they are now, and they are selling the small one. It's like everywhere, but I don't have anything to sell. Maybe the logo, but that's all what I have. If I published, for example, Joachim Topol, and I sell the publishing house, I don't have the rights for him to sell his rights to another.
I have a question about or two questions about the Invasion '68 book. This history might be known to the Czech audience, but I'm curious about the history of the photos immediately after '68. I assume they weren't published in the Czech Republic, or were they? Were they smuggled out? So that's the first question. The second question is I'm intrigued by these 7 Russians that they met later on. Were there any repercussions for them when they demonstrated against Prague '68?
The first question is about Koudelka's photos from '68. His photos was signed as an unknown photographer till 1984 because he stayed in the West, he emigrated, but his father lived in Moravia, and he don't want to have a trouble to him, so till his father died, till 1984, all these photos was published by AP, unknown photographer. And it wasn't smuggled because they sent it a few of films. He sent it to Vienna to agency in just these days. He gave it to somebody and he ran to the car and these photos was published very soon. What was interested, I saw these prints that all Czech people has a black
Bar.
Over the eyes, not to be recognized, because Czech police could arrest these people because they knows how they look like. And the second question is about these 7 or
Russians. Those Russian demonstrators that he met in later
Yes.
on after the publication of the Russian version of the book.
Only Natalia Gorbanevska was at the time at this exhibition because most of them at the time was not alive.
What happened? Do you know what happened to them after when they?
The demonstration?
Yeah.
It was like 1 month after August, and they treat them very badly. They got to the prison on psychiatrist, hospital, or. But we published also a book about 68 protesters, because not only in Russia was these protests, also in Poland, Bulgaria, East Germany. But it's sometimes there are stories that are not well known, that because, for example, in Poland, one person burned themselves in the football stadium, but Polish police said that it was an accident, and 20 years nobody knows that it happened because of the invasion.